People ask me what I remember most about that winter, and I always tell them the same thing. The cold? No. The hunger? No. It was a girl who never spoke. Not once. Not for 31 days. And then on the 32nd day she said 3 words, and after that nothing in the valley was ever the same again. I was 19. I want you to understand that first. 19 years old, with hands that still shook when I lit a cigarette, and they gave me a radio and a frozen hillside and told me to hold it. Let me start at the beginning. The town was called Vresna. You won't find it on most maps now. It sat in a long valley between 2 ridges, the way a coin sits in the palm of your hand, and in good years the whole place smelled of wood smoke and apples. That winter it smelled of diesel and fear. I came up with the second group, late October, when the first snow was still soft enough to melt under your boots. There were maybe 40 of us holding the eastern ridge above the town. Most were boys like me. A few older men who had done their service years ago and remembered just enough to be useful. And one sergeant. His name was Kovac. You meet a man like Kovac maybe once in your life. He was not big. He was not loud. He had a face like a cliff that the rain had been working on for 50 years, and when he looked at you, you felt that he already knew everything you were going to do wrong and had forgiven you for it in advance. He'd been in 2 wars before this one. He never said which. He never said much at all. The refugees came in early November. You have to picture it. A gray morning, the kind where the sky and the ground are the same color and you can't tell where one ends. And down the valley road comes this line of people. Not soldiers, families. Old women pulling sleds with their lives strapped to them. Children with no shoes that fit. A man carrying a birdcage, of all things an empty birdcage, because he couldn't make himself put it down. We gave them what we had, which was almost nothing. Bread, a little soup, space by the fires. And among them was the girl. I noticed her because she didn't cry. Everyone else was crying or close to it or had cried so much there was nothing left. But she just stood at the edge of the firelight with a blanket around her shoulders and watched. She had dark hair, cut rough, like someone had done it with a knife. She was maybe 17, maybe younger. It was hard to say. War ages some people and freezes others, and she was frozen. "What's your name?" one of the women asked her gently. She said nothing. "She doesn't talk," another refugee said quietly. "Since the bridge, she doesn't talk." Nobody asked what happened at the bridge. You learn not to. In that winter, every person was carrying a story you did not want to open, the way you don't open a door in a burning house if you can feel the heat through it. So she stayed. We called her nothing at first, then somebody started calling her the quiet one, and it stuck. Not unkind, just true. She worked. That was the strange thing. She didn't speak, but she wasn't useless and she wasn't a burden. She fetched water. She bandaged a boy's blistered feet without being asked. She had this way of being exactly where a thing needed doing, a second before you realized it needed doing. I watched her clean a rifle once. Somebody had left one by the fire, careless, and her hands moved over it slow and sure and certain, the way your grandmother's hands move over dough. Then she saw me watching, and she set it down, and her face closed like a window. I didn't think anything of it then. I think about it all the time now. November went on. The cold got into everything. It got into the food and the blankets and the talk, until even the older men stopped telling stories at night and just sat staring into the fires. We heard the enemy was coming. We'd been hearing it for weeks. Far off at night, you could sometimes hear the low grinding of engines, like a storm that never arrived. And in the morning, Kovac would walk the line and look down the valley with his old eyes and say nothing, which somehow said everything. Then one night the engine stopped grinding far away and started grinding close. I remember the exact moment because I was on the radio. Static mostly. We didn't have much to talk to. But around 3 in the morning a voice came through from the western post, thin and scared. A boy named Petter I'd shared cigarettes with. "They're in the valley," he said. "They're past the orchard. Milo, they're past the orchard." The orchard was 2 kilometers out. I'd walked it in 20 minutes once, in the autumn, stealing apples. I went and woke Kavak. He was already awake. I think he was always already awake. "How many?" he said. Petter didn't know. A column, trucks, maybe more. He nodded like I'd told him the weather. Then he stood up, and he put on his coat and he walked the line in the dark. And to every cluster of shaking boys, he said the same thing in the same flat voice. "Stand up, eyes on the road. We hold the ridge, that's all. We just hold the ridge." And we believed him. That's the thing about a man like that. He could have told us the sky was going to fall up instead of down, and we'd have braced for it. By dawn, we could see them. I'll never forget the first sight of that column coming up the valley. The snow had stopped in the night, and the morning was clear and terribly beautiful, the ridges white and gold in the new light. And into all that beauty came this line of dark vehicles, slow and patient, like ink spreading through water. Behind the trucks, men on foot. A lot of men. More than 40, I can tell you that. Somebody near me started to pray. Somebody else told him to shut up. Kavak told them both to watch the road. The first hours were the loud kind of fear. They shelled the ridge. Not well, they didn't have the range right, and most of it landed below us, throwing up black flowers of dirt in the white snow. But it was enough to teach 19-year-olds what the inside of fear sounds like. I lay in my dugout with the radio against my chest and felt the ground jump under me and thought, very clearly, I am going to die on this hill and nobody will ever know I was brave. Funny what you think. Then the shelling stopped, and the quiet that came after was worse, and into that quiet came the snipers. Now I want to explain something because if you've never been near it, you can't know. A man shooting at you with a rifle from far away is a different animal from a shell. A shell is chaos. It doesn't choose, but a sniper chooses. Somewhere out there a man is looking at you, specifically you, through a little circle of glass, and he is deciding. There is a terrible intimacy to it. You feel watched in your bones. The first one of us to die that day was a boy named Sasha, 19 like me, who lifted his head to look at the orchard. 1 second he was a person, talking, alive, complaining about his cold feet. The next he was not. There was no sound first. The sound came after, this flat crack rolling up the valley a half second too late, like the world's timing had slipped. We learned fast after that. We learned to keep our heads down, to crawl, to move only behind the rocks. But you can't fight a war with your head down. You can't hold a ridge if you can't look at the people coming to take it. And they had us pinned. They had 2 shooters, we worked out maybe 3. Good ones, patient ones. They'd found the high ground on the opposite ridge, a tumble of gray rocks where the sun never quite reached, and from up there they could see almost our whole line. Every time one of our men rose to fire down at the advancing infantry, one of those flat cracks came up the valley and another boy didn't come home. We had one good marksman. His name was Andrew, a hunter before the war, a quiet, careful man with a careful rifle. And for about an hour Andrew and the men on the far ridge played their terrible patient game across the valley, and we held our breath every time he settled in to shoot. Then Andrew lost the game. I didn't see it. I heard Kavak say a word I'd never heard him say low under his breath, and I knew. That was the moment everything tilted. Without Andrew, we had no eyes on that far ridge. Without eyes on the ridge, we couldn't stop the infantry coming up the valley. And the infantry, slow and patient and many, were already through the orchard and into the lower fields, close enough now that on the wind you could sometimes hear them call to one another. We were going to lose the ridge, and if we lost the ridge, the column went straight down into Vresna, into the town full of the old women and the children with no shoes and the man with the empty birdcage. We all knew it. Nobody said it. Saying it would have made it too heavy to carry. Kavak knew it most of all. I watched him crouch behind the big rock at the center of the line, Andrew's rifle in his hands now. He'd crawled out and dragged it back. Dragged Andrew back too, though there was no use in it. And I watched this old man who had survived 2 wars look down at the weapon and understand that he was not the shot Andrew had been. that none of us were, that the one thing we needed in all the world right now was a pair of steady hands and a good eye, and that we did not have them. And then he did the only thing left to do. He stood up, not all the way, but enough, and he turned and he shouted back along the line, hoarse, desperate, his old flat voice cracking for the first and only time I ever heard it. "Any snipers here?" he shouted. "Anyone, any snipers, anyone who can shoot." Silence answered him, the kind of silence that has 40 held breaths in it. We were boys. We could fire a rifle in the general direction of a thing, but a sniper, a shot across a valley into shadow against men who did this for a living, not one of us. We looked at each other and looked at the snow and looked at anything but Kavak, and the shame of it was a physical thing, and below us the enemy kept coming. "Anyone?" Kavak said again, quieter now, and it wasn't a shout anymore. It was almost a prayer. And that's when I felt someone move past me. End of part 1. Part 2. I want to slow down here, because this is the part I've told 100 times, and every time I tell it, I feel the cold of that morning come back into my hands. Someone moved past me. Light, quiet, I turned and it was the girl. The quiet one. I don't know how she'd come up to the line. She wasn't supposed to be there. None of the refugees were. They were down in the cellars in the town where it was safe as anywhere was. But there she was in her blanket, picking her way between the dugouts, calm as a person walking to church, while the air over our heads sang with death. "Get down," somebody hissed at her. "Get down, you stupid." She didn't get down. She walked, low but unhurried, to the big rock where Kavak crouched with Andro's rifle in his hands, and she stopped in front of him, and she looked at the rifle, and then she looked at the old sergeant, and she said 3 words. "I can shoot." That was all. A small voice, rough from a month of silence, like a hinge that hadn't been used. But in that frozen, terrified place, those 3 words landed like a bell. Everyone heard it. The whole line went still. Even the war seemed to pause to listen. Kavak stared at her. I saw 100 things cross his old face. Disbelief. Anger almost that it had come to this. A child, a girl who hadn't spoken in a month. And under all of it, fast and helpless, something that might have been hope. "You don't know what you're," he started. "I can shoot," she said again, not louder, just sure. "The way you'd say the sky is up," and she held out her hand for the rifle. I think it was the way she held out her hand that decided him. There was no fear in it. There was no doubt. There was just a girl with an open palm and a war coming up the valley, and an old man out of every other option in the world. He gave her the rifle. I will hear the silence of that moment for the rest of my life. He put Andro's careful rifle into the girl's hands, and her fingers closed around it, and something happened to her that I can't fully describe. She changed. The blanket fell off one shoulder and she didn't notice. The frozen window of her face, the one I'd seen close so many times, it didn't open exactly. It became something else. It became still. The way a deep lake is still. The way the eye of a storm is still. She'd done this before. We all saw it at once. Whoever she had been before the bridge, before whatever broke her into silence, she had done this before, and her body remembered it even when her voice had forgotten everything else. "There on the far ridge," Kavak said, low and fast, soldier to soldier now, not man to child. 2, maybe 3. In the gray rocks where the sun doesn't hit. They've got the whole line. They got Andro. She nodded once. She didn't ask which rocks. She'd already found them. I could see her eyes moving across the valley, slow and even, reading the far slope the way you'd read a face you knew. Then she lay down behind the rock. I have watched soldiers all my life since then, and I have never seen anything like the way that girl became part of the ground. She didn't crawl into position. She poured into it. Elbows set, cheek to the stock, the whole long line of her gone soft and heavy and rooted as if the hill had grown her. The blanket was forgotten in the snow behind her. The rough-cut hair fell across her face and she didn't move it. And then she went somewhere. That's the only way I can say it. Her breathing slowed until I couldn't see it. The shaking that was in all of us all the time. The deep animal shaking of being hunted, it wasn't in her. She was as quiet on the outside as she'd been for 31 days, but it was a different quiet now. It was the quiet of someone listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. Down in the valley, the enemy infantry sensed the pause in our fire and pressed forward. I could see them now without the glasses, dark shapes coming up through the lower orchard, 200 meters less. We had minutes, maybe not even that. Quiet one, Kavek breathed. Whenever you. She fired. I didn't even see her decide to. There was no drama in it, no held breath that I could see, no gathering. Just between one heartbeat and the next, the flat, hard crack of the rifle and the stock kicking back into her shoulder, and a thin curl of breath leaving her lips into the cold. For a second, nothing, the longest second of my life. Then, across the valley, in the gray rocks where the sun didn't reach, a shape that I hadn't even been able to find with the binoculars came loose from the rocks and fell. A sound went down our line, not a cheer. We were past cheering. It was a kind of gasp, a single breath let out by 40 boys at once. She didn't react. She was already moving the rifle, slow, smooth, hunting, reading the slope again, looking for the second one. Now here is the thing about good snipers, the thing she knew and the dead man's friends knew and we were about to learn. When you fire, you give yourself away. The flash, the little disturbance of snow. The enemy across the valley now knew exactly to the meter where the shot had come from. And there were at least one more of them over there, and that one was very good, and that one was now looking through a little circle of glass straight at the rock our girl lay behind. Move, Kavek said. Move, move. She didn't move. She'd seen something. I watched her settle that final half-inch deeper into the snow, and I understood with a sick lurch that it had become a race. Two shooters across a white valley, each one now knowing where the other lay, and whoever fired second was already dead. The crack that came next came from the far ridge. I heard the round strike the rock. A hard, ugly spang, chips of gray stone flying, snow leaping up beside her face. A hand's width, less. The enemy shooter had been a hand's width and a half-second from ending her. But she had not flinched. That's what I can't explain to people. The stone exploded next to her face and she did not flinch, because in the same fraction of a second the shot came in, her own shot was already going out. She'd read him. She'd known where he'd be before he fired, the way she always seemed to know where a thing needed doing a second before it did, and she had fired into that knowing. Two cracks almost on top of each other, his and hers, so close they were nearly one sound. And on the far ridge, a second shape fell. I was looking right at her face when she made that shot. I will tell you what was on it and you can believe me or not. There were no tears, there was no triumph. There was a kind of terrible, ancient sorrow, the look of someone doing a thing they are very good at and wish to God they had never had to learn. Her lips moved. I was close enough to see it. I don't know what she said. I've wondered for 30 years. Maybe a name, maybe a prayer, maybe nothing at all, just the shape of breath. Then she was hunting again. Was there a third? Kavek had said 2, maybe 3. The valley held its breath with her. The infantry below had gone to ground at the second crack. They'd felt the turn, the way animals feel a turn. For a long, long moment there was no sound at all but the wind moving over the snow and the small wet rasp of the girl's breathing. And then, far across the valley, a third shape stood up in the gray rocks. Stood up and ran. Threw down his long rifle and scrambled back over the ridge and was gone. A small dark figure fleeing over the white shoulder of the hill, away from us. Away from the girl who had killed his 2 friends in the space of a single breath. She did not fire at his back. I noticed that. I have always noticed that. She had him. He was running in the open, and she was who she was, and she could have taken him as easily as breathing. She lifted her cheek a half-inch from the stock and watched him go and let him go. I think about that more than I think about the shots. End of part 2. Part 3. After that, the battle changed. They say one person can't turn a battle. The men who say that have never been on a ridge above a town they love, pinned by shooters they can't see, watching their friends die one flat crack at a time, and then watched all of it stop because of one girl in a borrowed blanket. With the far ridge silent, we could lift our heads again. We could look down the valley. We could fire. And the thing about that enemy column was that its strength had been patience, and its patience broke the moment ours didn't. The infantry in the lower orchard had counted on us being blind and pinned. When the fire started coming down on them, accurate and angry from 40 boys who just watched a miracle and found their nerve in it, they wavered. Then they pulled back, slowly at first, then not slowly. By mid-afternoon, the trucks were turning around in the valley, awkward in the snow, and the dark ink that had been spreading toward Vresna began, for the first time, to drain back the way it had come. We held the ridge. I won't tell you it was clean or that it was glorious. War is never either of those things. We buried Sasha and Andro and 4 others on that hill, in ground so frozen we had to burn fires to soften it before we could dig. Kavak said a few words over each of them in his flat voice, and the few words were better than any speech I've heard since. But the town was safe. The old women were safe. The children with no shoes. The man with the empty birdcage. They were safe because a girl who couldn't speak found 3 words at the bottom of herself and gave them to us when we had nothing left. When it was over, when the last truck had crawled out of sight down the valley and the light was going gold and then gray, she let go of the rifle. That's the image I carry. She unwound herself from the ground, slow, like waking up. She'd been part of the hill for hours, and now she was a girl again, a thin girl in the snow, and the blanket was soaked through behind her, and her hands, I saw, had finally started to shake. Now that it was done, now that it was safe to shake. Kavak crouched down next to her, this hard old man who'd survived 2 wars. He didn't say good shooting. He didn't say you saved us, though she had. He took off his own coat, his coat in that cold, and he put it around her shoulders over the wet blanket, the way you'd cover a sleeping child. And he said one thing. "You don't have to do that again," he said. "You hear me? Not ever again. Somebody else can do the rest of this war, not you. You're done." She looked at him, and for the first time since the bridge, since whatever happened at the bridge, the frozen window of her face opened. Just a crack. Her eyes filled. She didn't sob, she didn't break, but the tears came down quiet over a face that had been dry for a month, and Kavak put his old arm around her and let her cry into his shoulder, and not one of us looked away, because it felt like the most honest thing any of us had ever been allowed to see. I learned her name that night by the fire. She told it to one of the refugee women in that rough, unused voice, and the word went quietly around the camp the way good news does. I'm not going to tell it to you. I've thought about it and I'm not. Some things you keep. But I'll tell you it was a soft name. A name for a girl who pressed flowers, not a name for a person who could put 2 men down across a white valley in the space of a breath. The war had given her the second thing. The first thing was who she really was, and I think Kavak saw that, and I think that's why he gave her his coat. She did stop. That's the part people don't always believe because they want a story where she becomes a legend, a famous shot, a name in the histories. She didn't. The next morning she went back down to the town with the other refugees, and she helped with the children, and she fetched water, and she was the quiet one again, except she wasn't silent anymore. She talked after that, not much, but she talked. As if firing those 2 shots had broken something open that her silence had been holding shut, and let the rest of her finally come back out. I saw her years later, long after. The war had ended the way wars end, badly and slowly, and for no good reason that anyone could point to. I was a grown man with gray coming into my own hair, walking through a market in a city far from that valley, and I saw a woman buying apples. I knew her at once. You don't forget a face you watched make a choice like that. She was older. There were children with her, her own, I think 2 of them with her dark hair. She was laughing at something one of them said, and the sound of it stopped me dead in the middle of that market, because in all my memories of her, she had never once made a sound like that. I didn't go to her. I want you to know that. I almost did. I had 100 things I'd saved up for 30 years to say. Thank you. Do you know what you did? Do you know how many people are alive because of 3 words you found at the bottom of yourself? But she was laughing with her children and buying apples in the sun, and she was a person who pressed flowers again, not a person who took shots across a white valley. And I understood that the greatest thing I could give her was to let her stay that way. To let her be the soft-named girl and not the quiet one. To let her go, the way she'd let that third man go, all those years ago. So I let her go. I stood in the market until she'd walked out of sight with her children, the way that third soldier had walked out of sight over the white shoulder of the hill, and then I went home. People ask me what I remember most about that winter, and I always tell them the same thing. It wasn't the cold, or the hunger, or the shells, or even the day we held the ridge. It was a girl who hadn't spoken in a month, walking calm through the singing air to where an old man knelt with his last hope running out, and saying, in a voice like a hinge that hadn't been used, 3 words. I can shoot. She could. God help us all, she could. And then, when the war was done with her, she put it down and never picked it up again, and went back to being the gentlest person I ever knew. That's the part the histories miss. Anyone can learn to take a life. It's the ones who can do it, and then choose every single day after not to, those are the ones worth telling stories about. So I tell hers, and now you know it too.